There's a strange kind of quiet that arrives after the storm. Not peace, not clarity, but an emptiness you didn't expect. You thought healing would feel like sunlight. You imagine a moment where the pain lifts and what's left is lightness, relief, direction. But what you're left with is silence. It's not sadness. Not exactly. It's the absence of what used to push you, the urgency, the ache, the restless need to prove, to fix, to become. And now that it's gone, you're left wondering, who am I without it? You don't feel broken, but you don't feel whole either. You wake up, and there's no fire, no fear, no hunger, just stillness. And in that stillness, a question forms, not loudly, not in words, but in the background hum of your being. What now? No one prepared you for this part. No one told you that once the wounds closed and the shadows were seen, you might feel less like yourself than ever. Because so much of who you thought you were was built on pain, on survival, on masks you wore for so long you forgot they were masks. And now, without the noise, without the panic, without the push, the person you used to be has quietly stepped aside. But the person you're becoming hasn't quite arrived yet. You're in between. And that in between is sacred. Not because it feels good, but because it's real. It's honest. And it's the first time in a long time that you're not performing. You're not running. You're not pretending to know. You are simply here, awake, unsure, and more alive than you've ever been. For so long, you were driven by something you couldn't name, a pulse beneath every plan, a knot in your chest you mistook for ambition. That inner engine, always humming, always urging, told you to move faster, be better, go further. You called it drive. But truthfully, it was fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being left behind. Fear of disappointing someone, even if you weren't sure who anymore. And now, that engine has gone silent. You might think something broke inside of you. But what if that stillness means something far more profound? What if your soul simply got tired of performing? You see, when you begin the journey inward, when you face your shadows, when you heal the child inside you, who was always bracing for the worst, you don't just feel better. You start feeling different. And it's disorienting. Because most of your life was designed around that fear. Your routines, your goals, your relationships, all wired around keeping that engine running, proving, chasing, enduring. But shadow work dismantles the machinery. It doesn't just comfort the wound, it exposes the system that kept it open. And once you see that system clearly, you can't unsee it. Suddenly, deadlines don't stir urgency. Achievements don't taste the same. Recognition feels hollow. And you realize much of what once lit a fire under you was really just smoke from a burning identity you've now stepped away from. This isn't collapse. This is awakening. It feels like standing in a house after the electricity's been cut. Quiet. Still. You can hear the wind outside again. You can feel the floor beneath your feet. And for the first time, you're not chasing noise. You're listening for truth. There's a moment quiet, but unmistakable, when you realize nothing is pulling you anymore. The deadlines, the praise, the pressure, they all used to tug at something inside you. They used to make you move, even when you didn't want to. You'd call it discipline or focus or staying on track. But now, there's no pull, just stillness. And the world doesn't know what to do with that. Because we're taught that stillness means stagnation, that if you're not pushing, you're falling behind, that if you don't feel driven, you must be failing. But here's the truth. No one tells you sometimes the stillness is the healing. Sometimes the pause is the wisdom. You haven't lost your ambition. You've outgrown the kind that was fueled by fear. Think about it. How much of your old fire came from the need to prove, to earn love, to avoid being seen as lazy, weak, or lost? Now that those voices have quieted, now that the inner critic isn't screaming, there's space. And in that space, it feels like you should be doing something. But your soul is asking you to do the opposite. To wait, to breathe, to not fill the silence too quickly, because what's being born in it needs room. You're not unmotivated. You're unmoved by the things that used to keep you chained. And that's not failure. That's freedom beginning to speak, not as a roar, but as a whisper. A whisper that says, "You've run long enough. Now, it's time to listen." Sarah's name isn't real, but her story is. 2 years of deep healing, therapy, inner child work, shadow integration. She turned toward everything she once tried to avoid: the abandonment, the shame, the old ache of never feeling quite safe in her own skin. And she didn't just survive it. She transformed. The fear that once clung to her like fog began to lift. The need to please dissolved. Loneliness became solitude. And for the first time in her adult life, she could breathe without waiting for the next blow. But something unexpected followed. When she returned to her career, the one she'd spent a decade building, everything felt off. Not wrong in a dramatic way, just hollow. The meetings, the marketing strategies, the applause from colleagues, none of it stirred anything inside her. "I used to wake up with fire in my belly," she told me once. "Even if it was fear that fed it, it gave me direction. Now, I wake up and wait for a voice that never comes." It's disorienting, isn't it? To heal what hurt and lose what once drove you. To realize that the flame you thought was passion was actually panic in disguise. This is the space between selves, where the old fuel runs out, but the new fire hasn't yet been lit. And you begin to see motivation isn't something you build. It's something you hear when you finally grow quiet enough. Sarah wasn't lost. She was becoming. But nobody tells you that becoming doesn't always look like building something new. Sometimes it looks like sitting in the ashes, waiting for what's real to rise. And that waiting, that silence, it's not empty. It's sacred. There's a man I used to work with, quiet, brilliant, methodical. The kind of person whose calendar was color-coded, whose desk was always clean, whose goals were sharper than most people's dreams. He was the definition of success, a respected architect, a man of plans and precision. You could almost hear the gears turning when he spoke. He had his entire life laid out like blueprints, 5-year projections, 10-year ambitions, every hour accounted for. But after a long season of healing years spent unraveling childhood stories and ancestral wounds, he came back different. Not shattered, not broken, just quieter, softer around the edges. He walked into the same office, sat at the same desk, opened the same plans, and felt nothing. He told me once, "It's like I'm walking through a life that used to belong to me, but now it just feels like I'm borrowing someone else's shoes." The passion was gone, but so was the panic. That pressure to prove, to climb, to never stop moving, it had dissolved. And with it, the fire that used to fuel his ambition. At first, he thought something was wrong. Maybe he was burned out. Maybe he needed a new challenge. Maybe he was just tired. But what he was really feeling was honesty. He had stopped needing to perform. And without that need, the noise of urgency faded too. This wasn't depression. It was directionlessness, born not from lack, but from no longer chasing things that weren't truly his. And when you're no longer being pulled by fear, the path ahead, sometimes it begins with standing still. Have you ever noticed how quiet truth is? It doesn't shout. It doesn't flash like a warning sign. It doesn't knock your plans off the table. It simply waits. There's something Carl Jung understood, something often forgotten in modern life, that the authentic self doesn't force its way through the door. It doesn't demand to be seen. It waits for you to become quiet enough to notice it. That's what I saw in him, the man from my old job. He wasn't disengaged. He was listening to something beneath the noise he used to call drive. Because the ego, the part of us that craves certainty and recognition, it's loud. It runs on comparison, urgency, perfection. It will wake you at 5 a.m. and tell you you're behind. It'll make you feel like rest is a sin. But the self, the deeper self, doesn't run on panic. It whispers. It says, this doesn't feel like you anymore. It says, you're allowed to want something different. It says, you've already proven enough. But you can't hear that when you're still running. And so, life gently begins to remove the things that made you deaf to your own knowing. The thrill of achievement dulls. The need to impress evaporates. Even the goals that once meant everything begin to blur at the edges. It feels like loss at first, but it's not. It's space. Space being cleared not because you failed, but because something deeper has been trying to reach you. Something that doesn't need applause or urgency or titles. Only truth, only resonance, only the sound of your own soul humming quietly when all the other voices finally fall silent. A few months after he left the office for good, I ran into him again. He looked different. Not brighter, not louder, but steadier. Like someone who'd stopped fighting gravity and learned how to float. We sat on a bench near a quiet park, and he told me about the building. It was just an old structure, one he'd passed by for years without a second glance. Weathered bricks, boarded windows, forgotten. But one day, during a slow, purposeless walk, something about it caught him. It was strange, he said, like it was waiting for me to notice it. He didn't take photos. He didn't sketch it for a project. He didn't Google who owned it. He just stood there, still, like he was listening to something that didn't speak in words. And for the first time in almost a year, he felt the soft flicker of something. Not motivation, not ambition, but curiosity. He started visiting it. Not to plan, not to fix, just to be near it. He called it visiting the silence. Eventually, sketches came. Not blueprints, not outlines, just fragments, shadows, emotion. As if the building had a memory and he was helping it remember. There was no pressure to make it useful, no deadlines, no return on investment, just presence, just noticing. And in that noticing, something came alive in him too. He wasn't chasing purpose. He was responding to invitation, not forcing life to give him answers, just letting it whisper again. Sometimes the next chapter doesn't begin with a decision. Sometimes it begins with a pause and a place that quietly asks you to see it so you can finally see yourself. What moved him, he said, wasn't force. It was flow. It didn't scream. It didn't push. It didn't tell him he was behind or late or lacking. It simply pulled him gently forward, like a tide rising beneath his feet. There's a kind of motivation that doesn't feel like effort, not because there's no work, but because the work doesn't steal from you. It feeds you. That's what he found, sitting near that building, sketching for hours without realizing time had passed, walking home with no need to explain to anyone what he was doing, smiling, not because he was achieving something, but because he finally wasn't pretending. This wasn't productivity. This was presence. And in that presence, a new kind of rhythm began to emerge. One not driven by fear of failure, but by the joy of resonance. The feeling that said, this is mine. You can't manufacture this feeling. You can't force it into a spreadsheet or squeeze it into a performance review. You recognize it like a song you forgot you knew. Familiar, grounding, true. And from that place, the projects he once couldn't face began to take shape again, but differently. Not as ladders to climb, not as mirrors to prove his worth, but as extensions of the quiet, steady voice inside him that now had space to speak. He didn't get back his old drive. He outgrew it. And what came next wasn't louder. It was real. Let me offer you something now, not an answer, but an invitation. If the silence has left you wondering what comes next, maybe the question isn't, what should I do? Maybe it's what is quietly calling me. Take a breath. Take out a piece of paper. Write down 3 things you think you're supposed to want right now. Maybe it's career success, or a relationship, or visibility, something you feel you should be chasing. Then ask, whose voice told me I should want this? What fear would show up if I stopped wanting it? Who might I disappoint if I let it go? Now write 3 things you feel gently drawn to. They don't have to be grand. Maybe it's a quiet walk in the morning, a forgotten hobby, a book that keeps whispering your name, a place that soothes you for no clear reason. Ask yourself, how would it feel to follow this without explanation? To give yourself permission to trust what nourishes you, even if it makes no sense. The difference between those 2 lists, that's the difference between performing and living, between ego and self, between chasing applause and following resonance. You're not meant to be endlessly productive. You're meant to be whole. And sometimes, the only way to find what truly moves you is to stop moving long enough to notice. Because the soul doesn't shout its desires, it waits. And when you're finally still, it speaks. I heard from Sarah again not long ago. She wasn't working in marketing anymore. She wasn't managing campaigns or leading teams. She wasn't chasing titles, clients, or numbers. She was teaching art to children. It started with a volunteer program her friend invited her to, a few hours each week, nothing serious. But something happened when she stepped into that classroom. Something she couldn't quite explain. The noise stopped, and in its place, something soft, something joyful opened. I didn't feel inspired, she said. I felt returned. Like I was home, but didn't know I'd left. She didn't rush the change. It took her nearly 2 years to shift from marketing director to elementary art teacher. not because she was unsure, but because she was honoring the pace of her becoming. Her friends were confused. Her family was worried. The salary was lower, the status unrecognizable. But none of that mattered, because her soul was singing again, and she hadn't heard that melody in decades. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't impulse. It was a quiet clarity, like the way sunlight enters a room without asking permission. She followed that light, not with certainty, but with trust. And when she looked back months later, she didn't see a career change. She saw a return to herself, the one she buried beneath deadlines and expectations. And this time, she didn't need a reason. Her peace was reason enough. If you're in that space right now, the stillness after the storm, the quiet after the healing, I want to tell you something. No one else probably will. You didn't lose your fire. You didn't mess up the journey. You're not broken. You've simply outgrown the version of you that needed fear to move. The goals you no longer chase. The dreams that feel distant now. Maybe they were never truly yours. Maybe they were built by a self that was trying to survive, not express. And now, that self has stepped aside. You are not lazy. You are not late. You are not behind. You are becoming. That sacred pause you're in, it's not punishment. It's preparation. The silence isn't the end of your story. It's the breath between chapters. The comma between the person you were and the one you're being called to remember. Not a newer version, not a better one, just a truer one. And when the new motivation comes, you'll know. It won't feel like panic. It won't feel like urgency. It will feel like peace, like alignment, like light entering a room that was waiting to be lit. So, if you're sitting in the void right now, trust it. There's nothing wrong with you. There's something deeply right unfolding within you. And if you stay long enough, quietly enough, gently enough, you'll hear it. Not a shout, not a command, just a whisper. I'm still here. I never left. And this time, you don't have to prove anything. Just become